Anybody can schedule an ASVAB interp, all right? A lot of times the soldiers will wait until we receive the scores. That's too late to schedule it. Normally, I suggest that you schedule the ASVAB interpretation as soon as you know what day the school's testing, okay? And that schedule comes out to you in advance on my SharePoint. I would look at the schedule, if it's one of my schools, talk to the counselor and say, hey, you guys are testing February 10th. The scores in Ohio will always get back to the school within 3 to 4 days after the day of the test. I suggest you don't schedule the interp at least 10 days after, just in case there's a backlog. Okay, so you do not have to wait on the MEPS to schedule the ASVAB. You don't have to wait on the test results to come back into our office. And especially if the school is an option 5, an option 2, an option 8, you definitely want to do those ASVAB interps, because unless it's an option 1, we're not going to get those test results for a long time. And regardless of the option of release, if you go do the interpretation and you see the kids' ASVAB scores, you won't have your line scores, but what you can do is any kid that's interested in the military, you can have them sign whatever that form is to release their test scores to you, and you can do a test pool. There are 2 different types of ASVAB interps. There's the ASVAB interp with the book, and then there's the ASVAB interp with the computer. And I want to talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of both of them. When you use the book, you could have the whole group of kids in one session and get it all done and over with in 45 minutes. Okay? The problem with the book is it takes forever to grade it, which you'll see here as you complete the book interpretation. The other problem is you don't get enough personal time with the kids, because you may have a big, large group, say 100 kids. Where are you guys doing the ASVAB interp next week?
St. Trace.
And how many kids tested there?
It was
40 kids? Okay, so if you have 40 kids in a room and you're doing the ASVAB interp and they're doing it out of the book, you're not going to have a lot of time to actually speak with any of those kids, because most of the time you're going to be talking about what their scores mean, and the rest of the time is going to be them trying to grade their interest inventory out of the book. The one big advantage of doing it as a big group is that you're just over and done with in one session. What I prefer as an interpreter is to do it in the lab. Okay, so if you're using the computer in the lab, unless the school is a school where every individual kid has their own laptop, if that's the case, you could still do them all in one group. But most schools do not have that, so you're going to have to schedule the computer lab. You don't personally schedule the computer lab, the staff will schedule it for you. There's some advantages and disadvantages of using the computer lab. So the disadvantage would be mostly a computer lab has 20 to 30 computers. So if a whole school tests all their juniors and say you have 150 kids, that's going to take quite a few classes, so it's going to be an all-day event. The advantage to that is it's an intimate group and you have more time to spend with each individual class. Okay, and our whole purpose of doing the ASVAB interp is to let the kids get to know us a little bit better. Even though an ASVAB interp cannot be an active recruiting activity, you can have the kids fill out just like a sign-in sheet where we do for all of the times we do a presentation, and then you can have them check, are you interested in the military, yes or no, and they can put their cell phone number. The other thing you can do if you're going to do an ASVAB interp at a school is ask the school if they're willing to let all the kids who said they were interested in the military to do a separate interpretation. You cannot do that unless the school says it's okay, because technically it's illegal. But the ASVAB belongs to the school. So, if the school says it's okay, then do it. but do it as a separate interpretation. And then I would take my recruiter copy with me, and that way you can show the kids what their line scores and the Army will offer them. To be fair to the other services, if they show up, you have to let them come, okay? Especially if you're doing a military specific one on the side. But no matter what type of interpretation you're doing, if a different branch shows up, even though you're conducting it, they can be there. Okay, but they are not allowed to actively recruit, and neither are you. Okay? And if you do a sign-in roster and another branch is there, you're gonna have to make a copy for them. Okay, that's just to be fair. We're going to talk about the scores first, and whether you're doing an ASVAB interp on the computer or on the out of the book, the score part, the interpretation part of the scores will always be the same. That's the first thing you're going to do. So once I pass out all the ASVAB summary results sheets to the students, the first thing I tell them after I introduce myself is to go to the upper left-hand corner and make sure that's their name. Okay? So I start with upper left-hand corner, I go straight down, and then I move over to the right. I do it that way every single time so I don't get confused while I'm doing the interpretation. Okay, I have been where people are all over the place, and not only does it confuse the students because they don't know where you're going, but it'll confuse yourself. So I developed a process of going straight down and over, and that way you'll never get lost on what you're talking about. So I have the students go from their name, and then I tell them to look at where it says ASVAB results in bold letters, and then I tell them to go down where it says career exploration scores. Now the career exploration scores are a combination of all the tests that they took, and these are the scores they'll use when they go in to do their career exploring, hence career exploration scores. So the whole idea of this program in the high school is to take your skill, which is how you did on the test, and your interest, which is the interest inventory we'll do later, put them together and hopefully find the careers that would be best suited for you, okay? So when I go down and I talk to the kids about their career score, I'll let them know what each individual career score means, and then we'll talk about that you'll want to use the one career score you did the best on. Now a lot of kids will do kind of equally the best on all of them. Like this young lady that you see up here, she's clearly much better in verbal. And we'll talk about kind of how you can guide kids. And you're certainly not going to be a professional test score psychometrician at the end of this class, but it'll give you a few ideas on how you can help kids do better if they're trying to get into the military, or some of the things that kids will need to look at if they're trying to go into a specific career. Okay, so we're going to talk about the very first one, which is the verbal skills score. That's a combination of paragraph comprehension and word knowledge. So what is word knowledge? What does it mean?
Your knowledge of the English vocabulary, the meanings of words.
Vocabulary. Plain and simple. Okay? Word knowledge is vocabulary. Paragraph comprehension is reading, understanding what you read.
Sentence structure, all that.
Well, actually on here, it's just basically reading something and interpreting what you're reading. Okay? Now, yes, on like the ACT, paragraph comprehension might go into some of the writing skills of sentence structure. But on the ASVAB, there's no sentence structure type questions. It's all reading knowledge, understanding what you read. Okay? The math skills score is a combination of arithmetic reasoning and mathematics knowledge. Arithmetic reasoning will be like a story problem. Math knowledge would be 10 times 50 equals. You can tell a lot about kids if you understand the difference, because with arithmetic reasoning, you have to also have what? Reading. You have a low reading ability, you're going to have a low arithmetic reasoning ability as well. These tests are important for the AFQT, so it's important for us as recruiters to understand that so we can also help kids who are trying to get in the military, but they don't have the score, okay? Science and technical skills is a combination of 3 different tests: general science, electronics information, and mechanical comprehension. One of the things I tell kids all the time, electronics and mechanical or engineering tests. So if students do well on these 2 tests and they're also very good at math, they may want to look at engineering type careers. Okay, STEM, if you haven't heard of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, that is something that our government is very dedicated to right now. So we always want to talk about STEM with our high school students, and I always talk about engineering with them. Engineering in the sense of the military is a little bit different, because what do our engineers do?
Blow stuff up.
Well, blow stuff up, but mostly it's construction, right? So our horizontal construction engineers and all that, they're mostly building. There's lots of different kinds of engineering, but they all require physics and math knowledge. And this mechanical comprehension test is actually a physics test, okay? It's not auto and shop. A lot of people think mechanical comprehension has to do with cars. That's what auto and shop is, all right? So that mechanical comprehension is physics. Everything I just said, you can turn your paper over and it's all on the back of your ASVAB summary result sheet. So before you go do the class at the high school, you can study the back. Then I go down and talk about the ASVAB tests individually, which all the kids already know what they are because we already talked about them, with the exception of auto and shop. One of the things I talk about with students is that auto and shop is not in the science and technical career score. The reason is that women test as a whole so poorly on auto and shop that it would draw the science and technical skill score down, and it would make it look like women should never go into STEM careers. So after I've gone through that, just explaining what the tests are, and a lot of times you'll get kids saying, well, what's my score mean? Or we're getting there. They need to understand this before they understand their score. Because the score means nothing if you don't understand what the test was. So we go to the military entrance score, and I tell the kids that this is the score that you need if you're looking to go into the military. We also have a concordance table, which you can find on my SharePoint. The concordance table will compare this score to their ACT or SAT. It is not technically approved by OSD, who is in charge of this test. But we still use it because it's pretty accurate, but the bands get wider and wider as the score gets higher and higher. A score of 31, and this is what I like to say to schools when I'm trying to convince them to use the ASVAB. A score of 31 is only like a 13 on the ACT. So what are you saying about your school? I mean, kids that can't even get a 31, they're probably not getting into college either. Now, you have to be very careful when you're talking about that with high school students, okay? So we never want a high school student to leave out of there saying the Army recruiter told them they were stupid. So we got to be very, very careful to not use words like pass or fail. There's no pass or fail on the ASVAB in a high school. The only time you're going to say pass or fail is in here, all right? Or at the MEPS. In a high school, there's no pass or fail, because we're all about making kids feel good about themselves no matter how smart or not smart they are. So military entrance score only matters if you're trying to get into the military, and that's exactly what I say. It's out of 99. But to join the Army and the Marines, you need a 31. I think I just read something that the Marines wants a 32, but I'm not really sure how accurate that is, but I did read something recently. The Navy's a 34, 35, and the Air Force is like 35, 36. I let students know that those scores can change at any time, because at one point the Air Force and the Navy were only taking people with 50s or higher. So a lot of it has to do with hiring practices, just like sometimes we can't put in a grad Bravo till we put in 3 grad Alphas or something like that to keep our quality at where the government needs it to be. I don't go into these conversations with students. However, sometimes educators will say, well, I don't understand, the Navy let the kid in, but the Army won't, or vice versa. And I explain to them that Congress sets numbers of the quality of applicants that we have, and that 60% of all applicants have to have a 50 or higher AFQT score. A lot of people don't know that. You may not have known that, but that's Congress mandated, congressionally mandated stuff. We have no control over it. So when the Army smart people are looking at hiring trends and people getting out and all those trends, that's why sometimes we have open and closed categories. Well, the Marines and the Navy and the Air Force is on a different cycle. So if for some reason a whole bunch of Bravos or people with less than 50 get out of the Navy in the next year, then they know that they have a whole bunch of Bravos opening up. So that, if that explains why we have open and closed categories, now you know why. So don't get into deep discussions about military entrance score, all right? Then I go over and I talk about percentiles. And this is probably one of the hardest concepts to get across. I was doing an interp down in Cincinnati right before the holidays. I was not conveying what the percentile score meant well at all. And the counselor jumped in and she gave another example when the kids were like, oh, now I get it. Although I don't particularly care for people to jump in while I'm giving a class, it's more important for the kids to understand the concept than it is for my own pride. So I just step back and allow the teacher to say what she wanted to say. A lot of adults don't even get it. So I'm going to try to attempt to explain it the best I can, and then we're going to have a little test, which is the same thing I give to the kids. So on the percentile, you have 3 columns. How they compare to everybody that's in their grade and their gender. Be careful when you're using your sheet as a guide. If you have a mixed group of kids, mixed meaning 10th, 11th, and 12th graders all in the same room, this is only going to be for the 12th grade student. It's not going to say 12th grade if you're in 10th grade, and it's not going to say 12th grade if you're in 11th grade. So I always say it compares you to your grade, your gender. The recruiters will say the first column compares all the females. No, it compares all the females who are in the 12th grade. If you're a guy, this will say males on it. All right, so just caution. That's one of those notes you want to really mentally make, because when you're up there and you're reading it, you'll say the first column compares all the 12th graders to females, all the 12th grade females. And the guys will be going, what? Mine says males. And now you've already lost half the kids. More than half, because usually men take this more than the women. All right, so percentile is a score out of 100, right? When we talk about a percent, 50% is right in the middle. So if we're talking about percentile, let's look at this young lady's math skills score. It says 22. So out of all the 12th grade females nationally, this female student is in the 22nd percentile. So if 100 12th grade females were lined up in a row, she would be number 22. Now if we go to the second column, this compares her against all the males in her grade. So when she scored 22 out of 100 women, and then you lined up 100 men in the second column, she moved down to 17 out of 100 men. When you compare her to all men and women in the 12th grade, it's just the average, so it'd be 19, okay? Now when we go down and look at auto and shop. This is your test. In auto and shop, do girls score better than men, or do men score better than women in auto and shop, based on what you just learned?
Men score better.
Yes, men score better than women in auto and shop. So taking the same concept, this young lady scored 53 percentile against all 12th grade women. Slightly better than average. But when you compare her to all the men, she only scored 21% better. I like to use the concept of the push-up. There may be one girl, and I'm going to say it's Sergeant Harry, 'cause she looks like she's in better shape than me. I bet Sergeant Harry can do more push-ups than some random male soldier in the Army. I bet there's one male in the Army that she can do better. But if you took the average of all the male push-ups in the Army, Sergeant Harry's not going to score higher than the average male. Not unless you're like preparing for Ranger School or something and do like 100 push-ups. That's the same concept with this auto and shop, or really anything when you're talking about percentile. One person could score better than another person, but when we're looking at the whole of males to females, females are not going to score higher as an aggregate against all the men. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yes.
Okay. So this is probably the hardest concept for the kids to understand. If you don't feel real good about explaining it, just go on. As a professional teacher, you can often tell when kids have no idea what you're talking about. In a setting with strangers, they're not going to say they don't understand. I will normally stop after each block of instruction and say, does everybody understand? Typically, it's very easy to see the deer in the headlight look and you'll be like, you don't get it. But if you don't really get it and you don't feel like you can explain it better, move on. Yes. The question was, is it okay to periodically stop and do check on learning? Absolutely. That's vital to instructing. The problem's going to be is you have a 45 to 50 minute block of instruction, and depending on whether you're doing a paper test or a computerized interpretation, if you're doing it out of the book, you're not going to have a lot of time because it takes forever to grade that. If you're in the computer lab, you have a little bit more time to talk and do checks on learning. But I will typically, after each section, say, does everybody understand? If they don't say anything, I move on. Your ability to have time management when doing this is not going to be very good. It's just not. This is a skill of being able to go from topic to topic to topic in that shortened amount of time. Yes, so I wouldn't spend a lot of time, and there might be kids afterwards, so you can always say, hey, afterwards, come up to me and I'll explain it more, and that typically always happens. Okay? Now, when we get over to the standard score bands, these are the actual scores they got on the test. It's arbitrary. It really is, because first of all, we don't even know what the test is out of. MEPCOM won't tell us what the test is out of. And each grade is graded separately. So the 10th grade that takes this, the 10th grader, this score will look different even if they had exact same answers. So if we took a test and put 10th grade on this one, 11th grade on this one, and 12th grade on this one, the only thing that will be the same is the AFQT. All of this is different because it's graded according to the grade. That's a little confusing. Not something I would go into with students, but it's something you should know, because if you take your summary, your recruiter scores, just do this one time. Take your recruiter score and compare it to the scores that a junior has. They'll be different. The only thing that will be the same is the AFQT. All of these standard scores will be different than the standard scores on your recruiter copy, because this is graded according to what a junior should know. It's called norming. So it doesn't matter for us because we get a recruiter score. Then it's all recalculated for the Army. This is calculated for the high school student. Okay? So the standard score is arbitrary, but what I tell high school students is 50 is where we want you to be on the academic test, not the technical test, but the academic. The academic test is verbal, math, science, right? All kids in Ohio that are in 10th grade up have to pass the Ohio graduation test. If they score 50 on the math, the reading, and the science, they'll pass their OGT. The OGT is administered in March. So you guys that are going to do this interpretation in January, if there's any 10th graders in there, or any 11th or 12th graders that have yet to pass those tests, this is a really good indicator for them, okay? For placement exams, if you have seniors that are getting ready to go into college and take their placement exams for math and English, if their scores are at 60 or higher, they should place into college level math or English. But it has to be higher than 60 or they're not going to place. I want to just briefly explain the score bands, and this isn't something you need to talk to kids about, but this is something that you want to talk to a kid that you may want to consider for a kid who wants to join the military who didn't pass the ASVAB. Okay? Now, we don't use pass at the school, but if they're trying to join the military and you have them in here, that's going to be important. All right, from a recruiting perspective, there's a few things you want to understand. The AFQT is made up of the 2 math tests and the 2 reading tests. So every time a kid says, oh, I failed it because I really suck at electronics, no. You didn't get a qualifying score because you can't read or you can't do math, all right? That's important for you to understand. The other thing is these boxes. So if you look at the boxes, some of them are longer than the other ones. This is like a variable. It's trying to say a range of where you would score if you were to retake the test. So the wider the box, the more inconsistent your answers were. So if you have a kid that needs to retest and a lot of their boxes are really wide, you're only going to see this if a kid tests at the high school. You want to put them on march to success for at least a month, okay? And we're always going to talk about march to success when we're talking about the ASVAB anyway. But like this young lady, if we're looking at her math and verbal, you can see that her math is really bad. And the only reason why she has a fairly high AFQT score is because she has a really high reading score. Her reading is really high, but her math is absolutely horrible. I would wonder if she even gets a line score because her math is so bad. So definitely for this young lady, if she didn't have a qualifying score and she was trying to retake the ASVAB, we would want her to concentrate on math, right? So if she was trying to become a medic, she's not going to qualify for it probably because her math score is too low, or any other the MOS that requires math. Field artillery probably, I don't know. Signal, not really sure because I'm not a recruiter. But they have to, this will give you a good indication. And sometimes you'll see a kid score, they're all at 40, but they're all in a row. So if you were to see a kid whose X's are like below 50, but they're all pretty much lined up, what could you ascertain from that? One, you could tell that they tried. Because if they didn't, their scores will be all over the place. Like the kid that only takes the test that they wanted to take and they blew off the other ones. But if this young lady, hers are bad because of her math. But a lot of times you'll see kids like that, they more than likely have a learning disability, they're a little bit slower, or they have a reading problem, okay? Or it's a test-taking skill problem because they're showing that their skill level is the same through every test. So either they're not finishing all the tests because they can't read fast enough or they don't have good time management skills on the test, or cognitively they're just at that level. Not everybody is military bound, not everybody is college bound, but those kids who are lower cognitive ability still need to find a career. But if they're trying to join the military and they're there, unless it's a test-taking skill problem, you're going to have a real issue trying to get their test scores up using March to Success. So I wouldn't discourage them from trying, but if they're all in a row, that's pretty much saying they are where they are. There's no real skill deficiency there. That's just where they are, okay? Whereas with her, you can clearly see she has a skill deficiency in math. So we can get that math score up.